Hi everybody. I had a different video planned this week, but I just couldn't get my brain to focus and get it done. I really do hope you understand, and I appreciate that understanding. I'll be able to share it with you all next week instead. Many of you are probably feeling distressed right now, and I wish I had some words of wisdom, but any reassurance I might offer just feels pretty hollow right now. Instead, I'll let past me and my friends speak from a place of love. My friends and I put this little Comic-Con panel together back in April of this year. I hope it might be something that will bring you a little joy and comfort. Please do note that we did film this in April and it does represent our views at that time. A lot has happened since then, but we still believe that Good Omens brings people together. Good Omens has become something of a cultural phenomenon. It's a single book and currently 2 seasons of television with a 3rd and final season in the works. Yet it has spawned a very dedicated fan base. What is it about this show that has us all so enamored? The answer is, of course, complicated, and it's going to vary from person to person. But my friends and I wanted to explore one idea, one theme that we think a lot of fans can relate to. The feeling of loneliness is a universal human experience, as is the desire for belonging. Recent studies show that people are currently experiencing loneliness at a higher rate than we did 30, 40, 50 years ago across generations and in numerous countries. Let's talk about how Good Omens speaks to this common experience and how it's bringing people together. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our loneliness-themed panel for Good Omens. I am Sandaria.
Hi, I'm Emily. I discovered Good Omens through David Tennant and Doctor Who a couple years ago, and I've loved it ever since.
I'm Madman, and I discovered Good Omens kind of by accident. Somebody's recommended it to me, and I already, like David Tennant through Doctor Who and everything. So, sort of fell into the fandom by accident this last fall, and I'm loving it. So, glad to be here.
I'm Kamapuri, and I made this pot.
That's a really cool pot, actually. I love that.
I just picked it up from getting glazed earlier today, and so I realized it was perfect.
That's beautiful.
Nice.
That is perfect. So what we're going to do is talk about Crowley and Aziraphale, and then after that we each have a couple of characters we've picked, and we'll go over a number of the different characters from both seasons and the book, and then we'll talk about how the different organizations and some other interesting things in Good Omens are affected by loneliness. So I thought we'd start with Crowley. He's a literal outcast and a free thinker from the get-go. He's never really fit in with heaven, but after the fall, he never really fit in with hell either. Madman, what do you think? Do you have any thoughts about Crowley's experiences of loneliness?
But yeah, I think you kind of touched on a lot of them. He's sort of, in heaven, he had his place and he had his role. And, we hear about, the little tidbits about the times that he was there, when he was talking about gravity and everything. So he clearly had belonging and everything there. And then, with the fall, like you said, he's still good at heart. Don't tell him I said that, but he's still good at heart. So he doesn't quite fit down in hell as well. And so I think it's interesting that he has found his, sort of counterpart, whether, Aziraphale, we'll get to him too, whether or not Aziraphale realizes that he doesn't quite fit in with heaven or not. And I think it's interesting, this sort of Crowley's loneliness has kind of made him jaded a little bit, feeling separated from the things that he thought were true and the way he feels about the universe and humanity and things like that. His loneliness has kind of made him jaded. And so it's interesting to watch him and how gentle he is with Aziraphale, because, he did not get the luxury of like a nice transition into understanding where he's at. And so it's almost like he's trying to make sure that Aziraphale is a little more aware of things, because he definitely seemed very sort of ignorant in the beginning himself. And then the fall obviously sort of burned him. So.
Yeah, I feel like Crowley has had a couple of different experiences of loneliness. It seems like there was probably the loneliness of the abandonment after the fall, which we haven't seen, but we sort of hear, that referenced when especially when he's drinking after the bookshop burns down. We kind of get that sense that was a time of loneliness. But then at the point that we see him, it's almost like he's in the experience of loneliness by choice. And, it really has allowed him to develop as an individual, and really evolve as an individual. So he's not evolving by hell's rules, goes along with hell as far as he can. He's obviously not evolving by heaven's rules. So, in a way, loneliness has sort of helped him.
That's an interesting point about that and him becoming jaded. So he's had a lot of different experiences on Earth. And I know, so it's insinuated at least that he's made human friends. At least he was somewhat friendly with, I think it's Leonardo da Vinci. And he also makes that reference when Lee Morag dies, saying it's different when it's someone you know. So it seems like he's attempted to find like friendship or companionship or something with humans, or at least to relate to them. I don't know if that's like how exactly that's affected him, made him, on the one hand, a little bit more jaded, perhaps, because like he says, you can't get too attached, but also more empathetic with them.
Yeah, I feel like part of him becoming jaded and individualistic kind of means that he is less reliant on being like connected to a specific place. Like Aziraphale has his bookshop, but Crowley mentions multiple times that they should just go off together, and he doesn't really seem to care where.
So, and speaking of Aziraphale, when Muriel says that books are like people, I thought that that was a weird thing to say, except they're portable. And I thought, what does that mean? A book isn't really like a person. So what does Muriel mean? And it occurred to me when I was thinking about Aziraphale's loneliness that they keep you company, books, I mean. So I think maybe the bookshop really is a really specific way for Aziraphale to keep himself company. Like reading the books is like experiencing people, and they don't, unlike what Crowley's doing, they don't die. The books remain there, right? It's a safer way to experience humanity.
Yeah, I kind of feel like where Crowley is sort of lonely by choice, and sometimes it's alone and maybe not lonely, but sometimes it's alone and it's definitely lonely. Aziraphale is like lonely by alienation. Like that thing where there is something that he belongs to, and it matters to him that he belongs to it. It's important to him that he is, aligned with heaven in some way, but heaven doesn't actually care about him. And so,
Ouch.
I know.
That's a good point.
But so being a part of an organization that you really care about that doesn't care about you is a different sort of a loneliness.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when Aziraphale is kind of alienated from heaven, he's kind of forced to be more individualistic like Crowley, and where Crowley might find like comfort and like confidence in being an individual, I feel like Aziraphale finds it daunting and scary, and kind of tries to go and like keep that connection with heaven, even if it's not really like a good one, because it seems to be like his only sense of belonging, even if it's not like perfect. I think he is attached to the idea of what heaven could be. And so he stays or hanging on as much as he can.
With Aziraphale, I kind of view him as sort of lonely by nature. Like he's not lonely. His lonely is not loneliness, like Kama was saying. It's a different kind of experience. And he sort of finds his solitude in his bookshop and in, human pleasures and kind of, he's like a tourist almost, where he's, enjoying his time there and he's feeling connections with the locals, but it's not necessarily like the deep connection kind of thing that it seems like Crowley's maybe looking for, that he has with Crowley already. The demons joked that said that, Crowley was gone native or whatever. And I think it's almost Aziraphale, obviously, who's gone more native. He feels like a tourist, he acts like a tourist, but really he's sort of belonging in the environment. And I think it's interesting because it's sort of like Crowley is pointing out how Aziraphale has connection and how he is becoming more human-like. And that although he feels secure, doesn't feel lonely because he's connected to heaven, Crowley points out how he's less like Heaven and more like Crowley, in the fact that he's okay, like I get that you know, go Heaven and we're gonna win and everything, but when that happens, you're not gonna have these things that have drawn us both to Earth, that keeps us both engaged in Earth. It's like Crowley again is sort of softening the blow, kind of guiding him to this understanding, and then through that, obviously, it brings them together.
I think Aziraphale's determination to stay connected to Heaven is keeping him from finding belonging. One thing that I think is interesting, though, is that I feel like Crowley has found a sense of belonging in Aziraphale because of their relationship. And so I wonder if Heaven is also keeping Crowley from finding true belonging.
Yeah, I like how you put that, because it's sort of like belonging, having a purpose gives them belonging. And so taking care of and guiding Aziraphale in Crowley's eyes, I suppose, gives him a sense of purpose and gives him a sense of like, you know, I'm needed here kind of thing. Not like in a weird way, but just helping him sort of see the world. And it helps him, I think, process his own understanding too, because he gets that exposure. I feel like I'm going way deeper in a wrong direction with that one, but
No, that makes sense. That I like that idea because purpose is important to finding belonging. It's not just like somebody you're hanging out with, right? But having a purpose in life. And yeah, having been rejected by Heaven and rejecting himself, the purpose of hell. Crowley had to make up his own purpose, and Aziraphale is still maybe kind of working on that a bit.
And I'm further to that point, I think Crowley's still working on it too. I mean, he says at the beginning of season 2, like, we ever wonder what's the meaning of it all? So I think he certainly feels much more, I don't know, my sense is he feels much more comfortable having Earth as his home and being a part of Earth than Aziraphale does. I think that the analogy of Aziraphale as a tourist on Earth was very apt. And so in a way, Crowley belongs more on Earth, but there's also this kind of sense of, well, how do you belong in a place where all the other beings live and die and come and go, and you're not aligned to either of the cosmic purposes of heaven or hell?
You just think, what's the point?
As a group of the two of them, the book does say that one of the reasons that they kind of end up together is because they have this common experience. So they end up having more in common because they're both doing their own thing on Earth. So they have more in common with each other than they do with either of their respective offices. And I think that that's something we see a lot is what's important in finding your people or your group is shared experience.
Based on the way that we're talking about this, I'm sort of seeing a lot of like commonalities, sort of analogies of the experience of LGBTQ youth, or you know, or of any age, I suppose. My interpretation, based on the conversation we're having, them having these images of, he's like, Crowley's gay. All right, so he has told he was just being himself, you know, and he either came out or something was revealed. And Heaven said, or, you know, his parents or his home, his belonging was removed. He was denied, goodbye, kicked out. And he sees Aziraphale and he's like, you're gay too. And Aziraphale's like, I'm just here for the tax. I don't know what you're talking about. Sort of the way we've been talking about it reminds me of sort of a parable. So maybe that's part of the reason that people have felt like this. You have people who have been kicked out, who have been kicked to the curb and said, you're done. So there's sort of representation, and you could even do the same with like neurodiversity. You know, Crowley is, let's say, has ADHD, and then you have Aziraphale, and he's showing like autism. So it's sort of interesting to me, like that. I feel like those are the two sort of broad categories, sort of coming to the surface about belonging.
Yeah, that outsider experience is, I think, a really big commonality in the fandom. The specific experience, the specific outsider experience for the LGBT community. And like you said, for neurodivergent community, because both the characters are coded in that way. Also, the religious community, I think it doesn't get talked about a lot, but there's definitely a lot of a-religious or non-religious or atheist or agnostic folks in the fandom as well. You know, you come to your family and you say, I don't believe the same thing you do. And sometimes they ostracize you, and sometimes you might kind of fake it for a while, try to stay in the family because you don't want to lose that family.
God's plans
Are you going to say ineffable?
Can we talk a little bit about a companion to owls specifically? And it does relate to the loneliness that Job is feeling, the isolation and grief that he is feeling after his family is killed and he's lost everything. I do think that what's happening in that mini-sode is it's kind of being turned on its head. So instead of that companion to owls, it's instead of saying how lonely the person is, we're seeing the person find the companionship, or at least the first thread of it.
I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways it's kind of a microcosm of their whole story arc together, right? That they're on these opposite sides, and it seems like there shouldn't be any commonality, but they really do actually have shared beliefs. And you get to see that a lot in Companion to Owls. And their shared beliefs are things like, we shouldn't be killing kids and we shouldn't be destroying Job's whole world. Like, we should actually care for people.
In that episode, obviously it's a turning point. I mean, you have like a whole video about just that episode because there's so much packed into that. And it's sort of Aziraphale's moment where he recognizes that he has cognitive dissonance about what's going on upstairs and what's going on upstairs, right? I did have a note on here that when we were talking about this, I just got an image of Aziraphale's like, wow.
Yeah.
When he put the goats. So I just wanted to share that.
Wow.
I think Crowley feels a little less lonely by the end of the episode, but I think that Aziraphale might feel a little more lonely. He's for the first time starting to realize he might lose his connection with heaven.
There's that line that Crowley says when Aziraphale thinks that Crowley's going to take him off to hell, and he's like, no, you can't fall that way. And Crowley says this line that's like, well, then nothing has to change, does it? But it does really change. Like, something really significant has changed for Aziraphale in that moment. And there's some level at which Crowley's like letting him have his cognitive dissonance.
Oh, the quote that Crowley says is, "You're just an angel who goes along with heaven as much as he can." And I think that represents what you guys are saying quite a bit, because like he's letting him have his cognitive dissonance moment, but he's also not saying like you're completely outcast from heaven. You're just not like the rest of them.
Oh my God, you're right. That's right. It's such a gentle way of saying you're different, but
It's okay.
you still belong. It's okay. Yeah. I never realized that before, but really good point.
I'm getting goosebumps here, guys. This is great.
Talk about a little bit about some of the other characters, because it's not just Crowley and Aziraphale as much as we love them. I chose to talk about Gabriel and Beelzebub. Without the choices that Gabriel and Beelzebub made, Aziraphale wouldn't have ended up in heaven at the end of season 2. So Gabriel's feelings of loneliness and his willingness to abandon absolutely everything just to have some companionship and belonging is kind of what cascades all these different events until you get to the finale. And one of the reasons that Gabriel is so desperately alone is he is the only supreme archangel in the universe. So there's no one for him to relate to, no one with similar experiences to him. And when he first, at the end of season 1, when Beelzebub comes up and they both have that little conversation about how, try and get 10 million demons to stand down, try and get 10 million angels to stand down. They did have a connection, something in common with each other, a relatable experience that neither of them could share with anybody else, like literally in the entire universe. And then they keep saying, well, I guess we never have to meet again, but they keep meeting again, which is a lot like Crowley and Aziraphale. So they're doing it just because they enjoy each other's company and they can relate to each other. Heaven is like, it's got to be desperately lonely. Gabriel doesn't have any friends that we see. He hangs out with Sandalphon, but Sandalphon's more like a lackey than a friend, and Michael and Uriel are more like rivals, I guess, than friends.
Yeah, I mean, there's this quote that Beelzebub said in the second season where they say, "Don't you ever wish someone would tell you you're doing a good job?" And I feel like with both of them being in this like high position, they're kind of alienated from the rest of the angels and demons because they're just kind of like expected to take care of everyone. And no one really tells them that they're doing a good job. And they're more jealous of them. And so I feel like it's harder for them to connect with the people around them.
Like the oldest sibling, right? And so you got mom and dad, they're off doing their own thing and they're always taking care of everybody. And they're just like, you know what? I've had enough. Nobody appreciates what I'm doing. I'm lonely at the top. I'm out, you know? And then I also had it, was reminded of the image when Aziraphale and Crowley are going, there's that mirror image when they're going on the escalators where one's going up, one's going down.
Yeah.
And it sort of gives me this idea that heaven and hell aren't so different after all. Like they are a mirror image of themselves, of each other, you know?
And you're right. It's like heaven is empty and lonely. Hell is cluttered, but still lonely because there's nobody sharing things in joy down there. Everyone's just like a cog in a machine in hell, kind of like it's like a corporate nightmare or something.
This might be a total tangent, but I was kind of thinking about when you were talking about the conversation they had during the first season Armageddon and trying to get their sides to stand down and all of that. And I was thinking about how Armageddon was supposed to be the world ending, and then it didn't. But it set in motion these events that are leading to the next, something ended there. And I don't know if we even know totally what it is yet, right? Because we won't totally know what the whole arc of that is till season 3. But
yeah, every day something's getting closer.
Something's getting closer.
Sure. I chose Adam and them because I had this sort of big realization about humanity being saved by feelings of loneliness and then the feelings of belonging and like how that kind of played in. So them is like a diverse group of friends. They have different backgrounds, motivations, roles, and they sort of all get along in their little world. You know, they even call it, Adam, who's sort of in charge of them, even calls it like, it's my world. They positively influence each other. And then when Dog comes to Adam, is positively transformed by belonging as part of the them and Adam, right? Adam, as this goes along, Adam sort of has the increasing, growing evil inside of him. He struggles to resolve the dissonance between belonging to his new friends that are sort of tempting him and them, right? They obviously have different goals and different feelings and all that. He tries to paint the destruction of humanity and end of Earth through the lens of the them's sort of existing lore, sort of like the way that they see the world and say like, oh, well, it'll work out because, we sort of have this own world of our own anyway. So now we can just expand that and we'll all own parts of it and we'll be in charge of the rest of the world. Obviously the them sort of like, okay, but that's too far. Like there's a line in the sand and you crossed it, right? And he's alone at the end when he's sitting there and they're forced to be there. I think it's interesting to point out the fact that even Dog abandons him. Earlier he said, no one could take Dog away from me. We're up together to the end. Adam says towards the end that he already has all the world that he could possibly want. And it was walking away from him right that moment. And eventually he decides to cast off these new friends because the idea of belonging to them is so much more powerful than the loneliness he realizes he's going to have from the evil. I think it's poignant that they stand together in face of death, war, pollution, and famine. And I think it's important to point out that their togetherness, their belongingness is what gives them strength, right? So they're in the face of death, pollution, famine, and war. These children, these young humans, humanity itself is fighting these forces of hell and heaven because of their strength, the strength of their togetherness.
You're right. Their ability to be a group, to belong to a group, is what allows them to defeat evil, to win in the end, right? To avert Armageddon, and also get rid of the 4 horsemen. So yeah, that's a really good point. And I love what you said about Dog too, because I never, first of all, including Dog in the them, thank you. Dog deserves it. That's a really good point. And what you also said about forcing people to be the way you want, like when Adam tried to force his friends to be the way that he wanted them to be, or a certain way, that's when he started to lose them. Letting people be themselves was the way for them to be the best group of friends that they could be, was accepting his friends the way they were, right?
The whole culmination of this, the thing that sort of drove it home for me, was Adam's choice of belonging to humans instead of belonging to something else. is exactly what caused the end of it all. His choice to say, I don't belong to you, Dad. I belong to them. And that is what shut everything down, is his choice to stay with the people that he felt belonging with, whatever that is. Yeah.
And then after that, at the end of the book and at the end of season 1, there's the scene with Adam stealing the apple and the line about how, like, there was never an apple that wasn't worth the trouble that you got into for stealing it, which is such a, like, the heaven and hell image together, right? Like the belonging of both of those parts within the character of Adam simultaneously. It's like an integration.
So next we would like to talk about Muriel and Eric.
So when I was sort of thinking about this topic for this panel, I was just sort of sorting through all the different flavors of loneliness that we get to experience in Good Omens. So we've talked about the outsider experience through the LGBTQ lens and through the neurodivergent lens.
Different experiences
of loneliness. And then with Gabriel and Beelzebub, we had the sort of loneliness of being at the top of the organization. And with Muriel and Eric, I think one of the things that's kind of unique about their experience of loneliness is like this experience of loneliness that comes with work and with being a part of an organization. And especially when you're in a part of an organization where you like have no power. Looking at Muriel, they've been at this desk by themselves for hundreds of years. You don't get the sense there's any sort of work-life balance going on there. I think they pretty much just only do their job, and nobody's probably ever told them they're doing a good job. So a lot of loneliness of that sort of doing the low-level, unappreciated job in the organization, which I think is relatable for a lot of us. For plot purposes, I think finding the matchbox for Muriel was actually probably one of those moments where you're like, where they might have really felt like, oh, somebody might actually notice me. I can do something, It actually did work out for them in a way. They got to go to Earth, which was very, very exciting for them. And then Eric, I kind of get the sense that Eric's experience of loneliness is being like the lone voice of reason in an organization, which is, again, also, I think we've all had that experience somewhere in our lives at some point where we were like, this doesn't make any sense. Does anyone notice that what we're doing doesn't make any sense? And then in season 1 on the Plains of Megiddo, of course, he's actually like, he's got the plan. He's done the responsible thing. He's trying to be a good employee, and he just gets discorporated over and over again for it. So I think of these as experiences of loneliness that are really like what I think a lot of people experience in their jobs and in their work. So one of the themes that we see a lot in Good Omens is this sort of questioning of received structures. Crowley's doing that all the time, and he's trying to get Aziraphale to do it all the time. So I think it will be interesting to see if the role of these two characters changes at all in season 3, if there is some renegotiation of these structures. I think it would be interesting and hopefully give them a chance to, have more of their contributions appreciated and maybe a little less aloneness for them.
It is also, I never really considered like how much, especially Eric, is like being an employee. The faceless, you all look the same to your employer. Like all of the Erics are just Erics. The person at the top doesn't care if you annoy them; they just get rid of you because there's another one easy to get. Yeah, that's very relatable. I hadn't considered that before, and it is an experience of loneliness because you are just a faceless automaton. It's the cog in the machine thing again. And Muriel's experience reminds me of the people that are kind of like shoved in the corner with all the work, and you just keep bringing them work. They don't get to talk to anybody. They're just more common average person's experience as opposed to the people at the top that you just have to keep going and have to somehow keep smiling about it even when you've been discorporated 17 times today.
While you were talking about that, Kemma, I was thinking about the contrast of the two of them compared to Gabriel and Beelzebub. because the loneliness in their roles of Eric and Muriel, the loneliness doesn't really get them down. Like they still have sort of like a, okay, you know, like lighthearted, like they have the loneliness that Gabriel and Beelzebub have without like the stress. Maybe that's what the difference is. They're not like salty like Gabriel and Beelzebub are.
Yeah, I think that Muriel and Eric, for being very small characters, have an enormous amount of fan love because there's so much implied in what's happening to them that we can relate to.
Yeah, I feel like they could also be compared to Shax and Furfur, because they're both, I mean, they aren't as low as Muriel and Eric, but I think they're still stuck doing repetitive jobs. Well, at least Furfur is. And it could be argued that it's that kind of like loneliness that pushes them to try to like go up the corporate ladder, I guess, because maybe they think they'll find more belonging or attention.
Yeah, it's true. The middle managers, they're never happy. It seems like they think that maybe the next level of power will make them happy when clearly their bosses aren't happy either. So Crowley and Aziraphale are peers. They're in an equal position on Earth, and same with Gabe and B. So with Adam and them, if you're like far more powerful, it's hard to have friends on a different, dramatically different power level. When he tried to raise himself up, that, like you said, that results in loneliness for everybody and unhappiness and possibly the end of the world. So, Emily, you picked Maggie and Nina, which I found to be a fascinating pick, by the way. I did not expect that. So I'm
Oh.
super interested to hear what you have to say.
Cool. I chose Nina and Maggie just because I loved their characters throughout season 2. I kind of came to the conclusion that Maggie is alone and therefore lonely, and Nina is not alone, but despite that, still feels a sense of loneliness. For Maggie, I think she's kind of like a hopeless romantic at the beginning of the series, and she kind of has this like unrequited love for Nina, and that kind of makes her lonely because she is like, she mentions multiple times that she's like shy or like she wasn't that kind of teenager. Despite that, she's like pushing her limits or putting herself outside of her comfort zone to like go see Nina multiple times a day. And I feel like that could lead to Maggie feeling lonely because even though she's putting in so much effort to connect with Nina, she kind of gets shot down. And she's like a really seems like a super like happy, giddy person, but being rejected, it kind of makes her, I don't know, it kind of gets her down in the dumps, I guess, because she refers to her love life as doomed. But yeah, as far as like a sense of place for Maggie, I have that her record shop kind of seems to aid in her loneliness, but also provides a sense of connection for her because her record shop is failing. She can't pay the rent. She hasn't for the past 8 months, but also she clings onto it because it's like a way for her to stay connected to her family since her great grandma opened it in the 1920s. And she does seem to be an active member of the community, because she mentions that she like never misses a street traders meeting. But I found it interesting that she doesn't really seem to make connections with the people on the street. Like when she shows up at Aziraphale's ball, she isn't just like instantly hanging out or like chatting up everybody that's there. She's just kind of like waiting, like looking for Nina. And then for Nina, it's more so a loneliness that can come as a result of being in an abusive relationship because she can't really form connections with people without being heavily criticized or judged by her partner. And even though she technically has someone, it's not really like a fulfilling relationship for her by any means. And it kind of forces her to like keep people at like an arm's length. In the first episode, Maggie introduces herself and Nina says, "I know who you are, you're Skinny Latte." It kind of gives Nina a hard exterior. So she's still reaching out. She's not completely blocked. She hasn't completely blocked people out. Oh, as far as it connects with the plot or like how it impacts the plot, I would say that Maggie's loneliness drives her to connect with Nina, which in a roundabout way saves Gabriel and Aziraphale because Aziraphale can say the trying to get Nina and Maggie together thing. I would say that Nina kind of helps Maggie find confidence throughout the season, which lets the demons into the bookshop. And then as far as season 3, I think that they will kind of develop in the same way that Crowley and Aziraphale did, where they'll find a sense of belonging in each other. But I also don't know where Maggie's character's going because she misspelled urgency and let the demons into the bookshop. So we'll see.
And yeah, I also was thinking that Maggie's records sort of function like Aziraphale's books. That probably gives her a sense of belonging and connection to all these musicians of the past. She definitely has an anachronistic, like self persona.
I thought it was really interesting the observation you made about Maggie and like how she, she is very cheerful and happy. And so she seems sort of like, oh, she's sort of friendly and, but friendly doesn't always mean that you're not lonely. Touched me a little bit here too, because I'm a very friendly person, but I often find myself sort of, it's that connection and everything. And I think that sort of probably will strike a chord with some other folks too.
But the image you were talking about of everyone kind of being back in their own places, like Maggie by herself back in the racket shop, and Nina by herself back in the coffee shop, and Crowley by himself in the Bentley, there is this sense at the end of season 2 of like everyone's really in these pockets by themselves. Now, all efforts at belonging have not really come to fruition yet.
Did we want to talk more about like the organizations, not just Heaven and Hell, but things like the Wickford Street Traders or other groups?
I continue to think that this is kind of conspicuous in its absence in most places. With them and with Adam has belonging in the community of the them, but he also has belonging. Like he clearly loves. We talked about that, like Tadfield and that whole area. We even see on the newspaper in season 2 that Tadfield is still having, great, perfect weather, even after season 1 ends. And I wonder is that a sign towards Adam's powers, or is it like Adam's powers are his belonging because that was the choice that he made?
Bringing it up sort of made me think of this is that, obviously Adam and them, they're sort of a community. You have Tadfield as sort of an extension of them. But then the Wickford Street is, again, a group of humans working together. There's sort of another sort of microcosm of equality, sort of, right? They're all sort of created equal. They have somebody in charge, but they have little meetings or whatever. It sort of contrasts to me the fact that maybe humans have the right thing going on, right? They have a group of people and they're all sort of equals. There's a little bit of hierarchy, but it's not extreme. And they're, for the most part, happy. They have issues with Christmas lights, of course, but for the most part, they're sort of on the same footing. And but then you have Heaven and Hell, who are like these pillars of like just structure and pain and dishappiness. I can't think of English words right now.
I like dishappiness. That got the point across.
So I think it's interesting because it's sort of, to me, it's sort of an interesting way to look at it is that the groups that the humans create have strength, and even in the night of the ball, they're all in the Aziraphale's bookshop, and there's sort of a strength to them. They're not necessarily, they get walked out obviously by Crowley to go be safe and stuff like that, but there's still sort of the amalgamation of them in that bookshop behind Crowley and Aziraphale when the demons are outside. It's sort of, there still feels like a strength to them. They're sort of seem like they would pick up sticks and fight their way out if they had to. I don't know, maybe I'm reading into that, but their togetherness is what is a strength. And now I'm rambling, but yes. So togetherness,
it makes perfect sense. Like that, like you point out, the pillars of Heaven and Hell. That's a really, really great image because they are, it's the institutional problem. They are nothing but obstacles to any kind of happiness for anyone.
When you said organizations, it made me think of Shadwell and the Witchfinders, because he's like a grumpy old man and doesn't really have any connections with like modern day people, so he kind of clings to this organization that has been long dead in order to find some sort of place and belonging. Um, and then also he meets Newt and that organization.
It's interesting too because I was trying to think of another organization, and if you think about what's the goal of Shadwell's organization is to bring pain or destroy or whatever, and it's like the other two organizations or groups that we looked at, you know, the Whipper Street and the them, they're about community and coming together. And so, which one of the organizations is in shambles, has had people leave? It's the one that's driving hate and fear and death and things like that. Just interesting observation.
No, totally good point there. With heaven and hell, their entire goal is war and to win the war, to come out on top. It has nothing to do with community building or, yeah, it's completely destructive, inherently destructive. Do we think this theme of loneliness and belonging will continue into season 3? Will it be a big, impactful theme for the outcome as we did see it in season 1? A typical sort of hero's journey or story arc, you know, you have the characters going through their various MacGuffins or whatever to achieve whatever the goal is. Obviously, the goal here is to avert Armageddon, but what shows us like success for the character? So they've averted Armageddon already, and as far as we can tell, if heaven and hell keep it up, they're just going to keep trying, right? It's Armageddon 56 will be eventually, right? So success wouldn't just be averting Armageddon again. There has to be like something that shows us this is, our characters have achieved their arc. They've got to the end. They've, you know, changed, grown.
So I think that Aziraphale's choice to go back to heaven, my sense is that he's closer to actually being ready to cut ties with heaven than he's ever been. So his decision to actually go back to heaven and to be there and to run it and to be at the top is very much an act of choice for loneliness. So I suspect that Aziraphale will have a very lonely character arc for at least a good portion of season 3. And on some level, it might be his version of finding his own individuality, the way that Crowley has been doing on Earth for millennia. But as far as the end of it, I was thinking of the quote of "It begins as it will end in a garden." And so I was thinking of the Garden of Eden symbolically. And if we think of it symbolically as a place where all of our needs are met, and belonging is one of the most basic human needs, then I would think that what that's pointing to is at the end of season 3, all of these characters being able to find their belonging, rather than Maggie alone in the record shop and Nina alone in the coffee shop and Crowley alone in the Bentley and Gabriel and Beelzebub alone off in the stars somewhere. That maybe we'd be able to find some more of that equality and community and connection and belonging, and that might be part of what ending in a garden could look like.
Madman, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking we should just end this whole panel with what Kama said, because it's sort of very like
Yes, poetic. Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. That was perfect, Kama. It really was.
It sort of made me go like, oh, like full circle, but like philosophically, like this is blowing my mind right now.
So on that note, I kind of wanted to talk about the outsider experience that was already brought up, but how Good Omens has sort of, in a meta way, fulfilled that itself, because so many people are finding their people and groups and relationships through this show, and that it's kind of fulfilling its own purpose. I don't know how better to like phrase this. Do you see that happening? Do you feel like it's happening for you in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like just in my own relationships, Good Omens is just like a good conversation starter, I guess. It's just, I feel like I've met multiple people through Good Omens, and like even talking to you about it, I feel like I've gotten a lot closer to people through this show.
I know for me, I discovered the show when I was spending a significant amount of time alone in a hotel room for work, and I was already doing some personal growth, so it came at perfect time because it helped me explore myself. So it helped give me a sense of belonging in the fact that this stuff, I'm not a spring chicken anymore, and so I'm not as exposed to the youth as I might have been years ago. So it was cool to see this show with these themes, with these types of people, especially second season on just television, just on Amazon, and people just talking about it like it opened my eyes. I mean, I got a Tumblr for the first time. I mean, this is big, people. Like it exposed me to a whole world that I didn't know existed. And I mean, I've always known I was like a little different from other people. You have your jocks and your nerds, and I was like, oh, I'm a nerd. But there's more to it. And I appreciate the fact that this sort of opened this sort of lens to reveal this broader spectrum of everybody, not just these different labels and everything, but everybody and is more complex than first meets the eye. This is starting to turn into a PSA. The point is I like the show's message of being yourself will help you be happy, and that your people are out there. And I think that's a great takeaway.
Being yourself and your people are out there. I love it.
You guys are actually making me tear up a little. Okay, go ahead.
It's working. It's working. There's just this thing about this story, right? So Neil had this idea and he didn't know what to do with it until he shared it with Terry. And then this story was born, and it couldn't have been born without both of them. Yeah. Keep crying, Sundaria. Keep crying. That's what I'm here for. And then I have read interviews with them where they talk about before the show ever existed, in book signings, Neil would say, my fans were all these like skinny goths, and Terry's were all these sort of like round nerds with pocket protectors. And so they would meet in lines for book signings, and then they would like fall in love and get married. And so you'd have a 1 and a 0 walking down the street together, which is Crowley and Aziraphale, right? It's like this pattern that gets repeated again and again. Neil and Terry, and then the characters, and then the people that met through the book, and then David and Michael becoming great friends. I mean, it just couldn't be more perfect. So I think about the name of the book being Good Omens, and I feel like that just pours out into everything that this story and the show and the book have been in the world. And I see it again and again on our Discord server. I see people who've shared about experiences where they've been able to do things that they didn't feel like they could do, whether that was writing or pursuing a new career direction or traveling, even though they've had chronic illness. There's been just so many different ways that people have been able to do that, and they've been able to do that because they felt like they had a sense of community that they found through the Good Omens fandom community. And because they had that sense of belonging. So I do think there's something about that, seeing those depictions of loneliness and then feeling like you belong because you see those depictions of loneliness. So it no longer feels like it's out there. It's like, oh no, I'm not the only one. And then finding all the other people who've had those similar experiences becomes the loneliness experience becomes an experience of belonging. And that's what I think that Good Omens has done for its fandom. And I think that's really cool.
I love that. The loneliness experience becomes the experience of belonging. That's exactly what's happening with Good Omens. And it's a pretty amazing thing to be a part of. So, all right. I think that's a good place to wrap it up because I'm not going to be able to make more sentences now. That was beautiful, everybody. Thank you.